Greetings, everyone. It is now December 14th in the year 2011, and we're continuing our discussion of Covey's 7 Habits. Hello, I'm Alan Duncan, and tonight I'm going to summarize. I'm going to start with the interpersonal skills because we've already talked about habit number 4. So we're in the interpersonal skills section. Habit 4 is think win-win. 5 is seek first to understand, then to be understood. And 6 is to synergize. So let us focus tonight on habit number 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Let me read a little bit from Covey. Habit number 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Habit 5 is the habit of communication, the most important skill in life. You've spent years learning how to read and write, years learning how to speak. But what about listening? What training have you had that enables you to listen so that you really understand another human being from that individual's frame of reference? We typically seek first to be understood. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. They're either speaking or preparing to speak. They're filtering everything through their own paradigms or their ideas, reading their autobiographies into other people's lives. In contrast, empathic listening gets inside another person's frame of reference. You see the world the way he or she sees it. You understand how he or she feels. This does not mean that you agree necessarily, simply that you understand his or her point of view. So I believe this has got to be the hardest. This is the hardest habit. I know because I've been trying to practice it for many years, and I find it still very difficult. Because it's just very difficult to take your time and listen to somebody else. It's a very difficult skill. So again, this being the toughest habit, it is all about the art of listening. Now you might imagine that listening is so that you can understand the first part. You'll find that if you become a good listener and you exercise good skills in listening, you'll flow very naturally then into being understood, which is the next part of that habit. But let's start then with that toughest part. We must learn to listen. That's the skill we need. We have to listen empathically. That means we listen with the goal to understand how the other person sees the situation. Empathy. We need to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. Empathy is not sympathy. We are not trying to feel as much as we are trying to understand. To have sympathy for someone means that we might actually feel the way they do. We're not trying to necessarily sympathize, but we're trying to empathize, which means to understand. Also, it does not mean that you disagree. You do not have to agree. But you must see it from the other person's frame of reference. So let me give you an idea here to clarify this. We are trying to listen and get the deepest understanding so that you can mirror back to the person what they said to you. Now I'm going to give you one more. Covey talks about this, and I think this is a good way to set up this situation so that you can really understand how you would go about, and it's really the whole habit, seek first to understand, then to be understood, because it deals with how do you reach an agreement and how do you go about the discussion of the agreement. Habit 5 sets the rules. Seek first to understand. That's the first part. That's your job. Then, after you're sure you understand, then you can proceed to be understood. But here is a way to go about it. first of all, the idea is imagine that you have a disagreement between two people. Here's the solution. You implement a procedure. Let us call it the talking stick. We're going to pass the talking stick. So we have a rule. First of all, the rule is we're going to agree to have a discussion to solve our differences. We agree that one of us will hold the stick, and that person gets to speak until the other person gets us to agree that we understand. In other words, the person who's holding the talking stick is listening. Is speaking. The one who's holding the stick is the person who speaks. The person who's listening does not respond, does not get to speak about his point of view until he gets agreement from the person who's talking that he understands. So when the first person is done talking, he still has the talking stick. The second person must mirror back to him what he heard. What he heard that person say, and he must make it clear as he speaks to that person that he understands. He must describe it in terms that the other person stated. It's sort of like mirroring. In other words, you just say back what the other person said to you. But of course, you went after deep understanding because remember, you're seeking first to understand. So you get deep understanding. You say back to that person what they spoke about so that you understand their point of view on the issue of disagreement. Then, once that person agrees, the person who is speaking first, holding the talking stick, agrees that you understand, or at least you've stated it satisfactorily, then he hands you the talking stick, and it's your turn to speak about your point of view. Now remember, it means you must let go of the idea about what you think about the idea. That's not the purpose of the first exercise. The first purpose, while the other person is talking and has the talking stick, you're trying to understand. You're trying to put yourself in that person's shoe. So the talking stick, it just becomes a way to discipline the two of you who are having the disagreement. You're trying to agree on things, how you're going to proceed, how you will follow the rule. The other person does not get to state his case until he has adequately stated the first person's case. And I think you'll find that once you go through an exercise like this, that it will be easy for you then to proceed to be understood. Because what happens is, when you really deeply understand what the other person has to say, you've given them a strength to be able to listen to you that they would not have had otherwise. And of course, once they pass the stick to you, then you do have the right to speak yourself. Now you're going to proceed on the part which is your part to be understood, because you've adequately represented the other person's point of view to them. You know it because you've mirrored it back to them. Then you proceed to be understood. So I think that talking stick is the best example that demonstrates this habit. Because while the other person has the stick, you are seeking to understand their point of view. Then once you get the stick yourself, it's your turn to state your case and to be understood. A very powerful habit. I would say the hardest habit of all of the 7. I encourage all of you to seek and study this. Study Covey's writings in more detail on this because it's very, very powerful. Okay, that's it for tonight, December 14, 2011. Have a great night.